The Book of Boba Fett is a spin-off series from the Mandalorian series set in the Star Wars universe. The new Star Wars films, the sequel trilogy, is rubbish, and I have very little interest in seeing these spin-off films. I don't, for example, think it's necessary to know how Han Solo got his name, what his favourite cereal is, what sports team he follows, and whether he's an organ donor. The Mandalorian, however, as I mentioned in my reviews of the two seasons, was a breath of fresh air. It was engaging, it felt very Star Wars-y, the universe felt dangerous and had a lived-in feel, and the characters were endearing. From what I've seen, it's by far the best Star Wars show or movie to come out since Disney clasped their claws around the IP. Now, of course, the Mandalorian, the character, kinda looks like fan-favourite Boba Fett. He acts like him, he's cool-looking, and lo and behold, in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, Boba Fett himself shows up, one of the few established principal Star Wars characters to make an appearance. His involvement in The Mandalorian was in good taste. His storyline was well done, and they got Temuera Morrison to play him, the man who played Boba's father Jango in Attack of the Clones, and who's voiced numerous clone characters in the Star Wars series and games. It's interesting that Boba Fett is so loved because, seeing as though all he really is, when you consider the movies alone, is glorified eye candy. He appears quite formidable in a limited role in Empire Strikes Back, but then in Return of the Jedi he just kind of stands around and then dies in an embarrassing manner. But the character is so cool looking that he's been resurrected in numerous Star Wars media, and now we have him in The Mandalorian, with the series making him the scary, badass bounty hunter we all envisioned he would be. Now, as much as I liked Boba Fett in The Mandalorian, there was an itching feeling I had in the back of my mind that Disney might be about to unleash their natural disposition to grab the character and milk him dry. Part of the charm of The Mandalorian is that it feels so separate from the main Star Wars films. This is just some small-scale story occurring far away in the distant part of the galaxy. But then we have Boba Fett showing up, we have Luke Skywalker, and I feared that we were being drawn back into the main Star Wars story, the Skywalkers, the Rebels, all of that kind of stuff. And I honestly thought, after the reception to Boba Fett, given the news that we're getting an Obi-Wan series, and the rumours about all sorts of other series like a Yoda one, that Disney were either going to shoehorn him into Season 3 of The Mandalorian, or they would make a Boba Fett show. And here we are, with the Book of Boba Fett. And the easiest way to describe the Book of Boba Fett is that a bunch of Disney suits looked at Season 2 of The Mandalorian and went, "Look! Everyone loved Boba Fett's comeback. Let's give him his own show now." The result is a season which feels rushed and unfinished, lacks ambition, and ironically needs The Mandalorian to save itself from falling into the dark chasm of mediocre streaming shows. It isn't terrible, but it isn't great. It's just uneven all round. Everything about it is uneven, and it is so poorly structured that for about 2 episodes it stops even being a Boba Fett show. There are poor episodes, good characters, underwritten characters, there are fantastic special effects, and then there are VFX that look like they were still being processed. Even the episode lengths themselves. Some are around a half hour long, others 45 minutes, some 1 hour. What's up with that? That's really weird. But it kind of symbolizes the disjointed, uneven feel of the Book of Boba Fett. So the basic premise is that Boba Fett has taken over gangster Jabba the Hutt's territory on Tatooine, along with his sidekick Fennec Shand, and he is looking to bring peace and stability in the region with the other crime families. It's Star Wars doing the mafia genre, much like how The Mandalorian did the Western, even though, funnily enough, the Book of Boba Fett ditches its undercooked gangster vibe in the last couple of episodes and goes back to essentially being a Western. But anyway, there is a new sinister Doctor Who baddie-looking villainous group which has arrived, known as the Syndicate, who are looking to take over. Only Boba Fett stands in their way. Boba runs a family now, as he's told by Fennec, i.e. crime family, even though that family basically consists of these two toads on steroids, a Wookiee, and a really annoying young speeder gang, who look out of place in this world and feel like they're a London moped gang who've just stumbled out of a local university looking for a decent takeaway. While all this is happening, and while Boba gets into skirmishes which result in him having to run off to his Bacta tank every 2 minutes, We get flashbacks of Boba's past, starting with the escape from the Sarlacc pit up to the point where he got his armor, involving, for example, becoming affiliated with a Tusken tribe and ultimately finding he wants to pursue a different kind of life to bounty hunting, hence him becoming a crime boss. I didn't actually mind the flashback storyline, it was quite a bit of fun, and I liked how it lined up with The Mandalorian. The present-day mob stuff was undercooked and felt hokey. There's too many scenes of Boba just ambling around with his helmet off and having boring conversations with cliché dialogue and painfully blunt exposition. I honestly wouldn't have minded if the first season ditched the entire crime boss stuff and started with the Sarlacc pit and went from there, ending when Boba sits on Jabba's throne, with of course the story given a bit more meat to it. Or better yet, give us a show where Fett is played by a younger actor who doesn't take his helmet off, and show us just why he got his reputation as one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy, going off of loads of different adventures, set perhaps before episode 3 and 4. It might end up becoming too much like The Mandalorian, but the issue is that The Mandalorian, both the series and the character, is more like Boba Fett than Boba is. The Book of Boba Fett has a fundamental issue in that we know this character as a badass bounty hunter, but in this series, he mainly just sits in a chair or walks around the market. That isn't when he's sappily playing coochie coochie coo with his pets, getting insulted by punks and taking it on the chin, or getting his ass kicked and his girlfriend having to do the legwork in fight scenes. Okay, there is a bit of defense with that last point. The series establishes that Boba is old, and he's recovering from injury throughout most of the show. And I'm not going to sit here and cry, look at how they massacred my Boba, because I understand the character is going through a change, but it still feels like he's a wuss, a far cry from the Boba Fett in The Mandalorian, which feels inconsistent. There was never a suggestion in The Mandalorian that he was now a rogue with a heart of gold. Can you imagine Boba from Empire Strikes Back, who argued with Darth Vader, apologizing to a guy with a cyborg eye for saying, keep an eye on him? I rewatched scenes of The Mandalorian while watching this series, and Boba Fett feels like a completely different character here. He was brutal there and cold-blooded, and this is after the Sarlacc pit and the Tusken Raiders. And he shoots the guy in charge of Jabba's palace and takes over, but now in this show he's directionless, constantly confused, reacting to things around him instead of being proactive, gets told what to do by other people, and doesn't seem to really know what he wants to do. What was the motivation for becoming a crime boss anyway? There's a lack of character moments for Boba Fett. Whatever epiphany he had about changing his ways is glossed over, when it should have been the core of the series. And among many things wrong with the show, you always run the risk of ruining a character when you make an entire show about a guy who's only well known for looking cool and mysterious. Just leave him as is. His appearance in The Mandalorian was enough. Will every character and their grandma get their own show until Disney has milked the cow dry? And Morrison, much as I love the fact that they cast him, was quite dry and lacked screen presence. He's good when he doesn't take his helmet off, but when he does, he just kind of makes the same expression, whether he's happy, sad, angry, or whatever. Might as well have kept the damn thing on. Like I mentioned, the show feels like a production that was rushed, and one of the biggest victims of this is the writing. The dialogue is so generic, it feels like an algorithm wrote it. Certain plot and character elements are bizarre, like Boba going back to the Sarlacc pit to retrieve his armor, sticking his nose in it without first checking to see if it's dead. And even then, why does he even think his armor is in the pit when he literally fought his way out of the pit while wearing the armor? Unless I guess, of course, his concussion made him forget. The structure of the show is very poor, as mentioned. There was no need to show Boba in a Bacta tank every time a flashback kicks off. And because it isn't until very late in the flashbacks that we are told why Boba wants to change his ways, we spent a lot of the present-day storyline wondering why Boba would even want to settle down as a crime boss anyway. I thought he was with the Tuskens for a few weeks at most. Turns out it's supposed to be years, but you don't get that feel because his time with them is broken up into flashbacks. We get 4 mediocre to poor episodes, and then the show literally just straight up ditches Boba Fett and starts following The Mandalorian for about 2.5 episodes. And it's when the Book of Boba Fett gets rid of Boba Fett that it actually becomes interesting. How embarrassing! How embarrassing! As Yoda would say. Of course, we end up going back to Boba, with Mando working with him to fend off the syndicate in a decent action spectacle of a season finale. But with us following Luke Skywalker and his training of Baby Yoda, a few adventures of the Mandalorian, the flashback of Boba and the Tuskens, the crime family stuff, and the incoming syndicate, what is this show even about? Why is it even called the Book of Boba Fett? I half expected Grandpa Fett to finish the show by closing a book with his grandkids in his lap saying, "And that's the story of how I met your mother." There's some standout set pieces and characters, like Boba riding the Rancor, the character of Cad Bane, and the cool big Wookiee, but it's definitely an underwhelming so-so series. It's very predictable, and could have done with a few rewrites, I think. The underworld, by the way, doesn't feel dirty or seedy. It actually seems like a decent place to live, relatively speaking. Check out this dialogue between Boba Fett and Cad Bane. "I'm faster than you, but I'm wearing armor. We'll see." What does that even mean? But there's a lot of elements that work, like Bane shooting Boba, beating him to the draw, and then the thing that saves Boba is not his guns, his knee rockets, or his flamethrower, but the stick he got from the Tuskens, the symbol of his new life instead of the old, the symbol of his tribe, of him looking out for others, which links to some of the show's greater themes like the line, "You can only get so far without a tribe," and Bane's contrary advice about looking out for number one. So there's definitely elements there for a great show. And at the end, after it's all said and done, Boba even says something like, "We're not cut out for this," meaning being a crime boss, implying that he's going to do something else, which makes you think then, what was the point of his entire season arc? Is he just going to go back to being a bounty hunter? Well, I'd rather have seen that show. His entire character development is all over the place in the show. The Book of Boba Fett has that stench of corporate meddling, which was more or less completely absent from The Mandalorian, at least in Season 1. I also think elements of the Baby Yoda stuff undermines the emotional weight of The Mandalorian's second season. And Episode 5 genuinely feels like they ripped it from The Mandalorian Season 3. You know, it's funny, I thought Cad Bane looked and sounded really cool and scary, but he's out of the picture after literally 4 or 5 scenes. He's basically the original Boba Fett in that regard. Maybe in 40 years we'll enjoy an underwhelming series looking at Bane's battles with weed and the weather to become a farmer. Thanks for watching.